Hello, hello, hello. We have another piece of content for you guys. This one was just posted yesterday on the Sneako Rumble channel. He's debating MoistCritikal Penguin Zero or Penguinzo about the age of consent. What a fun little topic, right? This is the kind of topic that you get banned off of YouTube. There's a reason this is on Rumble that I'm pulling this from, not YouTube. Um, but I actually want to help the age of consent people. I want to make a argument for age of consent, not against it. I know. Maybe some of you see and I play Minecraft, and you're thinking, oh, he's going to be arguing against the age of consent. But guess what? I'm going to be the first Minecraft player ever to actually vote for the age of consent. And I have a little surprise for you. I'm actually going to argue that maybe there could be an argument made for us to actually raise the age of consent. There's something of an argument there, and I'll tell you what it is when we get to it. So, all right, let's begin.
With all of what's going on here, why are you so insistent on like the age of consent being like unreasonable? Or at least that's the impression I and most people gather from the way you speak about it.
That's a valid question, and I want to first ask, like, what's your issue with my opinion on the age of consent, age of marriage?
Because I feel
Well,
like
that's a very interesting one. Okay. I kind of already know his position just from that. He said the age of marriage. He just kind of snuck that in there. Very sneaky.
age of consent should just be an accepted number, and I think the accepted one is 18. Like, regardless of where you talk about in the world, I feel like once you start talking about someone under 18, you're basically just talking like a predator. Like, I feel like 18 is a pretty well established number for most sensible people. At 8,
So he makes a normative claim, and you're a pedophile if you even look at someone 17, which kind of isn't an argument. That's not really an argument to say, why do you need the 17-year-old? Just pick all the people older than you. That's not a very good argument. And then he makes a normative claim, which is, well, people generally, 18 is pretty normal, and it's what people generally accept.
18, you're going to college, you're living your own life now, you're outside of
That's a slightly better argument, is the adulthood argument of like, well, you can sign a contract and you're done education, now you're in the workforce and you're taking on the responsibilities of an adult. That's a decent argument. Okay.
your family nest. Anything under that, you're still a kid.
Okay. It's not 18 in most of the United States where we both live, right?
Yeah, okay, and this is the other thing you'll realize between age of consent debates is most people who argue against the age of consent, all they do is they just point out the inconsistency and disparity around the age of consent, which is it's a fundamental problem just translating the moral issue of the age of consent into an ethical kind of framework into a law. That's kind of the problem because you kind of do have to just pick a number and then stick to it because you kind of have to because there's no real reason you can't date someone who's 17 and 355 days old, right? There's no real reason, or 64 days old, sorry. There's no real reason, right? Obviously, that shouldn't be that crazy to say, like, but they have to pick a line in the sand. So most anti they'll just kind of pick on this apparent inconsistency, but what they don't really understand, or at least what they're trying to ignore, is that the age of consent isn't off the idea that at a specific age you become sexually mature. Once you hit 18 years old, magically you're ready for sex. That's not what the age of consent is about. It's not really about the year. It's about the idea that you need to be sexually and mentally mature enough to handle a sexual relationship. That's the basic principle.
Yeah, but that refers to like Romeo and Juliet laws where if you're like 19 and with a 16-year-old, it's not technically illegal, but you're not a 19.
Yeah, for specific context, what he's saying, Romeo and Juliet laws, they're basically saying you can date someone who's below, who's like 16 to 18, as long as you're close enough. Like, I think in Canada, it's within 5 years. I don't know what exactly it is in US. I think it varies state by state. Some states it's 16, some 17, some it's 18. The idea is that the person who's older than you is not significantly older than you. They're kind of around your age.
18-year-old, right? So why would you be arguing for like a 16,
Well,
you know?
first off, I'm not arguing to lower the age of consent. I don't believe in the age of consent. We can get there. I want to establish some terms first.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it's not even just with Romeo and Juliet laws. There's a lot of states where it's 16 regardless of Romeo and Juliet. And then you go to Europe, most countries are 16. Japan, I think they just changed it. It was like 13 or 14, and now it's 16. Brazil, it's 14. I saw that from a Nelk Boys video. They were joking around about how they should, like, when in Rome, they're in Brazil, so they might as well sleep with a 14-year-old, right? Or across the world, 18. I want to see, like, why do you think 18 is the age of consent?
Yeah, there's no real reason is the answer to Sneako. There's no real anchor point for why 18. I think it's because of education. I think everyone's done their high school primary education by 18. That's kind of the argument. It is kind of what MoistCritikal was, but that's why we pick the specific age. But really, the age is just we had to pick one, right? There's the moral quandary of the age of consent does not pivot around the age of 18. It pivots around the concept that children can't handle sexual relationships. And so we had to throw in a line in the sand to kind of say, okay, that's a child, that's an adult. And where we picked was 18. And I think 18's decent. I think it could have been younger. I think it could have been older. I wouldn't look at a society that has a bunch of 17-year-olds as the age of consent and say that's a completely evil, decrepit, immoral society. That's not really the point, right?
Because that right now is the one that makes the most sense. I guess to piggyback off what you're saying, so if you're traveling right now, if you go to Europe, are you
like there's nothing magic about the number 18 is the point I'm trying to make. It's just a line in the sand we had to pick so that because otherwise it turns into a slippery slope. It's like, well, what defines a child? She's mature for her age, so the government just said, nope, we're picking 18, hard line in the sand. Anything younger, you're a pedophile. And that's the way it has to be. You need a hard line in the sand to protect the children.
going to be comfortable, like, hooking up with a 16-year-old? Like, just because it's legal there, would that make you feel comfortable?
No, I don't hook up anymore. I'm
not saying that you do, but I'm saying if you were, single and looking for someone, would you feel comfortable with it being a 16-year-old if it's in Europe versus US?
I wouldn't do that. Like, I would not have sex before. I think sex, like, out of wedlock altogether is something that we should not encourage anymore. And having the age of consent, having that idea encourages people to have premarital sex, right? Just that term, age of
How? That doesn't really make any sense, but okay.
consent means you're consenting to something that we shouldn't be doing. So no, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that.
Okay, but what about marriage? So you're saying we should be able to marry a 15-year-old? Why? That makes no sense.
Okay, so then instead of let's take it away from like premarital sex. Would you feel comfortable marrying a 16-year-old? Like, would you meet a 16-year-old with romantic intent if you're in Europe and maybe marry a 16-year-old? Nothing sexual.
I probably wouldn't personally, because I don't think that I'd be on the same mental playing field. I like to have intellectual conversations. I like to be with women that are around my same age, because then I can have conversations. I like to relate to them. I think there'd be too much of a gap. But other people, like, if they're able to get along, then I don't see why that's so much of a problem.
But why don't you see that as a problem? So for you, you're...
So, yeah, okay, sounds dumb, though. He basically said he doesn't believe in the age of consent, which means the best move for Charlie here is to just push it to the extreme and just make Sneako out to be kind of ridiculous. Oh, so it's okay if I date a 9-year-old and I marry? If I ask her father really nicely and the 9-year-old consents and the dad consents, am I allowed to go then fuck the 9-year-old? Sneako, how do you plead?
You're recognizing, like, this person's much younger than me. It is a kid. Like, you are talking to...
Okay, so let's define these terms.
Let's in high school.
Before we even get into... Let's define these terms before we even get into this conversation. What is a child?
I would
say underdeveloped. Well, that's actually a good question. I don't know. I did look this up, what the actual formal Um, it doesn't focus on sexual maturity. I don't think it does. Huh. Never mind. Fuck. Okay, well, I wouldn't even use the child argument because, according to the dictionary, a child is defined either by the legal age of majority, which is really just a made up legal age, or it's by puberty, which is, it's a bit. Oh, okay, well, wait a minute. Child, no, we can fix this. Child really is just a term to describe the developmental period between infancy and puberty. There you go. And then after that, it's adolescent. Ah, see, you get it? And then it's adult. So the way that people use the word child, okay, but what delineates adolescent and adult? Fuck. We're back at square one. But I don't really personally argue from the child argument. It has really very little to do with really whether or not they're a child. Has more to, or like what label you ascribe to the individual. That's a child, that's an adolescent, that's an adult. Because I guess the point Sneako's probably trying to get at is that what our society defines as a child and adolescent versus a grown adult is in many ways a social construct. It is in many ways made up. It's hard to really tie it down to anything biological. You can say, oh, brain development. Okay, well, it's very hard to prove that your brain develops at, say, 18. It's very hard to go like, oh, well, this study here proves that this. I think, but although there are studies that show that the prefrontal cortex does not develop significantly until you hit like 21, which is actually the argument I would make for raising the age of consent, which is, because this is a whole different side of the argument that they're not making right now, but a different argument would be that, well, you don't possess the necessary mental faculties to act as an adult, and therefore you're a child, and therefore you cannot consent. Which is kind of the idea behind age of consent, which is kind of irrespective of anything sexual. It's more just that you don't have the necessary brain faculties, i.e., the prefrontal cortex development, to actually engage in long-term decision making, understanding long-term consequences, strategic planning, impulse control, and all these different things, right? Emotional regulation is another one. So, but that's very hard to prove because your brain develops constantly. And it's like your brain technically doesn't stop developing until it's 25. So really, it's like, well, where do we draw the line in the sand? It keeps developing. And really, it comes down to however our culture has set it up, which is kind of Charlie's earliest argument where he said, well, you're done your education, you know, you're working a job or you're in university and you're out of your parents' home and you're no longer a kid. And he's basically making a socio-cultural argument for what defines a kid versus an adult, which is it's determined by the culture and what rights and trials that you go through as a child transitioning to an adult. You go through certain trials, like your first job. You go, you sign a business contract. You pay for your phone plan. You know, you learn to drive. You can have a drink. You can get drafted, right? Now, yes, USA, it's technically 21 to drink, but that's a different reason. The reason it was raised to 21 was for a different reason. But there's these rite of passages that you go through as a adolescent evolving into an adult, and then after you've gone through those you become an adult. So it's really determined by the culture and the society that you partake in, not so much the biology. I like the biological arguments better because I feel they're more concrete, but it's really hard to argue that, like, oh, at this specific age your prefrontal cortex is developed enough to handle the ramifications of sex. It's a hard point to sell because most people don't have an intuitive understanding of neurology, right? Of how your brain works. So it's a very hard argument to sell to people. It's much easier to do what Charlie's saying and saying, oh, just, well, look, they are going to school now and they're driving and they're paying bills and they can have a phone plan and they're an adult now. So, but it is kind of interesting that there is kind of no real actual biological delineator between a child slash adolescent and an official adult. It's really a cultural thing.
Use the age of consent. Under 18 would be a kid in my eyes.
So a 17-year-old who's 364 days, that's a kid?
Yep, I'm gonna use very hard set terms. If it is under 18, even if it's 17 364, that's still a kid.
That's a kid. Okay,
I think it's important to have these hard lines in the sand where it doesn't have this kind of wiggle room.
Okay, why?
Yeah, that would be my argument, is you need a hard line in the sand. It's not really... It has less to do, in my opinion, with the ontology of, like, what is a child. Like, that doesn't really come into play as much. It's more just you're creating a barrier to protect children. That's what the age of consent is. That's why we have 18. It's a hard barrier, legal barrier that exists. We created it, made it up to protect children. Because, yeah, there is no real reason you can't date a 17 364. You know, there's no real reason you can't, other than we need strict boundaries in place so there's no wiggle room for pedophiles to slowly start fucking kids, right?
Does that define kid?
As I said earlier, at 18, at that point, you're going out of high school, you're going to college, you're living on your own, you're no longer, a child under your parents' roof, for the most part, extenuating circumstances, of course, but at that age, you are starting to become independent. You are no longer just in your parents' household a kid. You are now going off into the world on your own.
You do admit that varies for most people, right? A lot of people don't move out of their parents' homes until they're 25, 26, 27. A lot of people don't.
There's nothing wrong with that.
A lot of people graduate high school 16. A lot of people graduate high school 20.
Okay, here's my question to Sneako, because he's going to try to point out the ambiguity and kind of pointlessness of the specifics behind the age of consent, which, fine. Nobody's really arguing that. Like, there's nothing intrinsic to the number fucking 18 that makes it an adult. Nobody's really arguing that. My question to Sneako, if I was in this debate, would be, without the age of consent, Sneako, how do you protect 9-year-olds from getting fucked? How do you protect them? Because you say, a developed age. How in court, when you have the 30-year-old pedophile trying to date the 9-year-old and do horrible things to them, how do you actually protect them? Like, what do? You can't. Because otherwise you just have to rely on people being rational, sensible, and adhering to, like, social norms. That's all you have to appeal to. Like, how is the legal system supposed to protect children from getting fucked and traumatized, Sneako, like, without the age of consent? So do you understand now?
Huge variable. So to set that in stone is that this is when you're a kid and this is you're an adult, that doesn't apply to most people. So why would you define a kid and an adult if it doesn't apply to most people?
Because it needs to be defined. Otherwise, you can get into this really gray area where like a lot of the things you say can be misconstrued as you wanting to have sex with a 15, 16-year-old.
Who construed that?
A lot of people, because,
I don't think anybody
clips
thinks
that I played in the video, you were saying,
way.
like, the age of maturity, the age of development, and then you use 16 and 17 in that clip.
So
for the age of marriage.
The definition of an adult is 18 years old.
That's not the point. It's kind of irrelevant, but it actually kind of is, though. It kind of is because the definition of adult is not really dependent on biology. It's mostly dependent on the culture and how the legal system defines it. It is kind of... It comes through two ways. One, it's the legal system saying you're an adult, you can do whatever you want now. And it's helpful for sorting you out legally from a child who's dependent on their parent versus an adult who's fully responsible for their own decisions. That's one, it's a legal construct. And then two, it's really a cultural construct. You go through certain rites and passages to evolve into a adult. But I'll listen a little more. I kind of think they're kind of done. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of interesting argumentation after this, but
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fine establishment right there. Anything under 18 would classify as a kid. I think that's important.
Okay, but you're getting that from what? From personal experience, from the government, from the law? Because that's legally in America, that's when you become an adult, correct?
Yeah, legally.
So
is.
you're following the government's definition of an adult.
I think there needs to be a definition, and that one's been around for a long time, and I think that's the one most people accept as the closest to, like, yeah, this is when you become an adult.
It actually hasn't, right? 200 years ago in the 1800s in America, the age of
Yeah,
marriage.
but we can't live like that. We're so much more advanced than that. Why would we play by those rules? Because at that point, are you going to start arguing that we should be able to start wedding 12-year-olds? Like, is 12 too young?
That's not the point. I'm saying you're saying that the U.S. defined adult as 18.
But it kind of is. It is the point, though. That is the point. Is that, well, then what? You're just allowed to fuck 9-year-olds? Sneako, the Muslim? Wait, you just go ahead and fuck 9-year-olds? That's what you're trying to do. Is you're trying to deconstruct these important barriers that protect children. That's really what's happening. That's the point of the age of consent, is to stop you from fucking 12-year-olds.
100 years ago, the age of marriage in America was 10, and the UK was 7. Right, so if the government decides to change it, you're saying it's 18. If the government, maybe if Kamala Harris gets elected, the new legal age of an adult is 25. And there could be reasons to say that. They graduated college, they don't leave the house until...
I agree. Actually, this I would actually make Sneako's argument, and I would definitely actually make this argument that people nowadays are much more mature and actually should wait. Because think about it, people don't want to get married until they're 27 anyway. People are all, the average age of marriage is something like 27 and 29, I think, in Canada and US respectively. I could be wrong, but it's very late. My point is it's very late. It's late 20s. So if you're not getting married till your late 20s, and really nobody should be having sex outside of wedlock, there's no reason to incentivize that or allow for it, really. Therefore, why not raise the age of consent, right? I don't actually believe that. I'm just saying there's room to posit that argument.
Until this age, the brains don't develop until they're 25. Your frontal cortex is not fully developed until you're 25 years old. A lot of people aren't making serious money. They're not able to live independently. A lot of things that you could use to classify an adult don't happen for the new age American until 25 years old.
Okay, but this is kind of dumb though, Sneako, because you're basically using Penguinzo's line of argumentation to make this argument, which is that your definition of adulthood is defined by your cultural rites of passages. So you're admitting that these rites of passages give credence to the definition of the adult, which is what Charlie said for 18. So how would you advocate for it being lower then? That's stupid. You just made Charlie's argument.
So if Kamala Harris raised it to 25, would you then say that that's the new age? Would you agree with that?
I think that'd be totally understandable. Like,
right.
I think that's fine.
So
like,
then does that make anybody who sleeps with an under 25-year-old, does that now make them a pedophile?
No, I don't think necessarily that makes them a retroactive pedophile.
So then what's a pedophile?
But it's an accepted definition of 18 for a long time. Is
not for that long. Not for that long, and not through most states, and not through most countries across the world.
Do you see why this is like a weird take to have though? Like I don't think you're coming at this from a place of you wanting to fuck a 15-year-old, are you? Like, to go back to that question, is 12 too young? Do you think 12 is too young?
I think 12 is too young for me. Yes.
Well, for you, oh my gosh.
For you, do you think 12 is too young in general? I feel like that should be an easy answer.
12 is too young in general, correct? Because,
okay.
Yes.
And I don't think you're
I want to
from
define,
that angle.
but what you're saying, your definition of adult is not even the actual definition. Do you know what the definition of child is? Like, anybody watching this can Google it.
Prepubescent.
You can Google it too.
Yeah.
The definition of child is somebody who has not reached puberty yet. That's the definition.
Yeah, and then you get into like the abibophile or whatever, as opposed to pedophile, and
also, I mean, it's also defined by the state. That's the other part of the Google answer, is that a child is defined by whatever the legal definition of a child is in that country, under the state. So, I don't know.
I don't know. I have no idea what those terms are. I don't know what that is, but I'm saying that's the actual definition. When somebody reaches maturity, it's based off of biological and physical maturity.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it varies for everybody. Adulthood is not something that you can set in stone because it's different for the entire world. Right? I moved out when I was 14. A lot of people don't move out until they're 25.
Yes, like no one's really arguing this, Sneako. No one's arguing that adulthood is not a transient, volatile, and a slow process. You know, it's a gradual process. No one's arguing that. The reason we have the age of consent is not because because a strict age, like a definitive binary age of consent, is reflective of this binary state of adulthood. No one's making that argument. The reason, like, we can agree that adulthood is a gradual process, but still require a hard line of the age of consent because it protects children. And it's necessary for the legal system to protect children. It's a necessary function. Yes, you're right. Adulthood is gradual, but the age of consent is binary, and it's very, you know, 17 364, and then she's a child, and then the next day she's an adult. I get it. That there's a disconnect there. It's a very binary switch from child to adult in terms of legality, but the biology and maybe even the cultural evolution to adulthood is a gradual one. So yes, you're right in pointing out that disparity, but the binary switch is to protect children with a hard line in the sand. It's not actually meant to reflect one's transition accurately from adulthood in the way that it happens. It's meant to specifically protect children. It's a necessary tool, regardless of if it accurately reflects adulthood or not. So it's kind of besides the point to make this like, yeah, but adulthood is different in every country and each state does it. It's irrelevant.
I went through puberty when I was 17. A lot of people went through puberty when they were 13, 14, 15. It changes for everybody. So for you to say that this is the set in stone age and say you're a pedophile if it's under 18, and then if you're over 18, you're fine. Well, then that's a weird line that doesn't make sense. So you're going to say this person is a terrible person if they're 17 years old, 364 days, and right after that, they're good to go. Well, it changes for everybody. So we have to have something, a definition. We have to be realistic with everybody. Well, we don't. But you're saying we, but that's not even the case in the country we live in.
Why argue against it? If you don't want the age of consent to be lowered, why are you making arguments?
It's very annoying because there's a very easy question Charlie has to pose to Sneako. He keeps making an ad hominem attack against Sneako where he's like, well, do you want to fuck a 15-year-old? I don't think you do, but do you want to fuck a 15-year-old? Which is besides the point. My question to Sneako, and really Charlie's question is to be, if we don't have an age of consent, Sneako, how do we protect the 9-year-old from Muhammad?
Arguments that the same people who do make. Right now what you're saying is kind of what NAMBLA used to say, if you're familiar with NAMBLA.
I have no idea what this is.
NAMBLA was the North American Man-Boy Lover Association. They
right,
were
because these people want to have sex to take advantage, and they don't abide by the rules of marriage. They don't have any sort of morality. They just want to have. I'm arguing for this because I believe in marriage. Sex should only be within wedlock.
But other people don't believe that. So if you're running a country that encompasses everybody, like, okay, Sneako, for your argument of like, well, people should just be able to marry them if they're ready or not, and just kind of see if they're mature enough. The problem with that is you're assuming everybody's a good-hearted, rational actor, which they're not. There's plenty of pedophiles out there who, if we got rid of that, they're not Muslim. They're not going to act by a moral system. They're not going to use their, rational head. They're not going to ask the father if they can fuck the daughter, right? They're not going to marry the daughter before they fuck her. No, they're not going to marry the 9-year-old. You know what I mean? Like, it assumes that people are going to be nice and rational and moral for no fucking reason.
That's why I'm talking about this.
Why, if you're arguing, we can take sex out of it. Why, when you're arguing for marriage, do you want it to drop? Like, okay, 16.
When did I say? Just because I don't believe in the age of consent does not mean that I want it to drop. Like, see, that's where the internet can go apply that. Just because I'm saying, no, because you're saying the definition of an adult is 18. I'm saying that's an arbitrary number, and that makes no sense. We should encourage marriage when people reach maturity. That makes much more logical sense.
That's even more vague, though. Like, but also you directly.
It's vague because it's different for everybody.
When someone can legally drive, they should be able to legally marry. You did say that to me.
Right. When somebody is legally ready to drive, the same thing. I think adults should drive cars. That's why I told you that.
Yeah, but 15 and 16-year-olds can drive cars. You said when someone can legally drive
across the world, 15 and 16-year-olds can have sex too. I think that people should not operate. But see, you keep thinking that I'm saying this because I want the age to be lowered. That's not what I'm talking about at all.
That's what it comes across as, though. When you
Right. No, I understand. Sneako's trying to reframe the idea of the age of consent as saying, hey, look, adulthood is a gradual process. Why do we have a strict line in the sand to delineate adulthood when it's actually a gradual process? And why don't we just use my Muslim cultural intuition to know when they're developed and then only fuck them when they're developed, or marry them, sorry, my bad, when they're developed. The problem with that is how do you protect children from bad actors? You don't have a way to convict and protect children from bad actors, because if you don't actually have a law to protect children, then there's no way to stop the pedophiles, Sneako. So how do you solve the pedophiles?
With the internet brain, because people in the West, they want to have sex all the time, and they have a different sort of mindset, right? Here in the Middle East, I'm in the Middle East right now, they want to get married and then have sex. So people, just because I'm saying this does not mean automatically lower. No, that's not the case at all. I want to ask you then, because you're insinuating that it sounds creepy and that I sound like a pedophile. What's the definition of pedophile?
It is an adult who is attracted to children.
Yeah, it comes from the Greek word pedo means child, and phile means love. So somebody who loves a child.
That's really weird. That's weird. Okay. That's a weird way to phrase it. Why do you phrase it like that, bro? I just love the child. I love him. I care about him so much. Come here, little boy. I want to love you. Ugh. Why? Like, whenever you hear someone have to fucking... it's so weird. It's so creepy. It's so creepy, bro. The spirit of Muhammad is taking over his brain. But whenever you hear someone have to skew and bend language, whenever you hear someone have to bend language and start inserting phrases that weren't there before, and start bending language in their benefit, like love. No, you mean fuck. Like, come on. Don't piss around the bush.
An adult who is attracted to a child.
To a child. Somebody who has not reached physical maturity.
Yes.
That's the definition of child. Somebody who hasn't reached physical maturity. It has nothing to do with 18. The definition of the word talks about physical maturity, not the U.S. government definition that you're basing it off of.
It's actually not true, though. It's actually not true. Google definition, which he just referenced, actually just literally lists whatever the... It says it's a child before puberty plus whatever the definition of child is in the state. So it is a government definition in many ways.
Agreed upon place. Otherwise, you get into this area. Again, you said when you can legally drive, you should be able to legally marry.
Right.
We don't have to talk about sex. Do you think it's okay to be marrying?
Well, let's figure out what adult is, actually. Because I guarantee you it just strictly evolves from the legal definition. A person who is fully grown or developed. Fully grown or developed? Then technically we're not adults until, like, what, 25? That's what I mean, is it's kind of a vague... It has to be interpreted, this whole term.
A 15 or 16-year-old. Probably not, right? Like, I would imagine probably not.
It depends. So this is where the age of consent becomes arbitrary. I don't even believe
it is arbitrary.
Consent
you're
is
right. Yes, Sneako, you're right. It is arbitrary. But it has to be arbitrary because there's no other way around it.
Is a weird thing to even speak about, but it should be the father, right? If I want to marry a girl, I shouldn't even just get consent from her. I should get consent from her parents. She should want to say yes. Her parents should want to say yes. That's consent.
This is what I mean. Yeah, this is kind of the problem when you get your politics and your ethics from a country which is dominated by a religion and doesn't actually have like a strong ethical legal system. You know what I mean? Like it's just run by a bunch of Muslims, so they're not super concerned with like a very intricate, structured, organized, protecting the children. And they're also a little bit barbaric. I'm gonna say, I'll be the first to say it. Muslims can be pretty damn barbaric. Like if there were bad actor pedophiles, I'm not convinced. You know, you would have to demonstrate to me. The onus would be on you to demonstrate to me that the Muslims would care extremely about such pedophiles. Because yeah, when you, it's just pulling. The problem is pulling from countries that are just dominated by religious precepts. The problem is the West is not a Muslim country, and everybody doesn't fervently follow the Quran. So there's no. So it's like he's making the argument of, oh, I'm going to make an ought claim. You know, it should be only in marriage, and it should be governed by the father. You see, if the father, if nobody had sex outside of marriage, and the father governed all the marriages, then he could make sure that no one was marrying a kid because he would use common sense. There you go, problem solved. Problem with that is that we don't live in that kind of a culture. We don't have Islam dominate the hearts and minds of the American people yet. And you need a legal system to protect children from pedophiles so they can actually be convicted, because here in the US we have a legal system which involves a court and prisons. You know, like when someone is a pedophile or when someone cheats on their husband or wife, you know, we can't just stone them to death in the town square. You know, here in the U.S., they actually have to go on trial, and trials use rules, hard rules. You know, they get debated all the time in these places called courtrooms with people who are really good at debating called lawyers. So you actually need a structure. You can't just call your brethren, Muhammad's, Ahmed's together to go stone the local pedophile when he rapes your daughter, right? So we need an actual legal system. And yeah, this is just really a giant cultural disconnect in many ways, because you can't just have this idyllic oh, the fathers will govern the marriage and then no one will have sex outside of marriage. That'll solve pedophiles. It's like nobody.
From the family, and then you get married. That's the Islamic way. That's the only way that makes sense. This American way of this girl wants to have sex now, she gave consent, and then you get all these false allegations like, oh, she was drunk, oh, she took it back, oh, she retracted consent. All this stuff, like there's not even a specific way that we can define consent. What is consent? Some people say it's
yeah, but the one true Islamic way has this, like, women getting beaten and probably pedophiles everywhere that don't get reprimanded at all. No, it's so obvious. You need a legal hard line in the sand. You need a legal system to protect children, because if not, what else will? Your little local community, right? I guess. But if you're running an entire country like the West, then you can't just rely on, you know, the religious ethos and the culture to protect children along with fathers and like your little town village where you only know 30 people. It's really easy to look after all the kids, you know, and that's the other problem too, is women don't go outside, and it's like the children stay indoors all the time, and so it's just a completely different culture.
yes. Some people say it's like nonverbal communication. Some people say that it doesn't count because she was under the influence or she was intimidated. Even this is an arbitrary, is a weird way to define when you're allowed to be in a relationship with somebody.
You're kind of talking around it, though. Those are all very different things. Like I said, we don't have to be talking about sex. I was talking about marriage. The question was, do you think, and you said when you are legally able to drive, you should be able to legally marry. Do you think it is okay for an adult to legally marry a 15 or 16-year-old?
Okay, well, by my logic, if the man is physically mature, if he's went through puberty and he's mentally ready at the age of 16, he's an adult. If he wants to get married to another girl who becomes a woman.
I just said an adult. Is it okay for an adult
Right,
to
and I
legally
established,
marry
but we haven't even established exactly what an adult. So if somebody goes through puberty and they're physically ready, they're biologically ready, they're an adult. So the two 16-year-olds can be considered adults by my logic.
We're not talking about two
What are you talking
16-year-olds.
about?
We're talking about an adult.
That is an
What you're
adult.
arguing, it's
What,
from the
what I'm
perspective of
saying
an
is that
adult.
so then
Yeah, what the fuck? Penguinzo is just fucking MoistCritikal. He's just floundering. Like, you have to understand the word adult and the word child are kind of meaningless words. What we're doing is we're protecting people who do not have the necessary mental and pubescent faculties to engage in sex without being traumatic. That is the fundamental moral quandary. Okay, here, let me present my argument finally, because these doofschnozzles haven't actually properly done anything yet. There is a moral argument, not just a legal and ethical argument. There's a moral argument, which is that we need to protect children within our culture. That's one. There's also like the the purpose, right? The teleological argument of sex is that it's supposed to be designated between an adult man and a woman, right? This is in pretty much every religious text. Is sex is supposed to be within the covenant of a marriage. It's supposed to be between an adult man and an adult woman, not between children, not homosexual, not with animals, not with dead bodies, all this shit, right? So you can make a teleological argument for you're abusing the gift of sex given from God, and you're using it improperly against his directive. And then there's like we also have a moral obligation to protect children, right? This is kind of the argument against abortion. That's what I mean. It is kind of irrelevant when it becomes a fetus or when it becomes a baby. When does the clump of cells transition to a baby? It's kind of the same argument if you actually think about it, because they're basically arguing, well, when does a child become an adult? It's like, well, there is no magical moment where they transform into an adult, because biological beings are a gradual evolution, right? So, and yeah, I guess what Sneako has grievance with is there is a fundamental problem, which is establishing a structured, organized, hard-ruled legal system around biological beings that are transient and gradual. That is a problem. And it pops up in abortion where it's like, well, when does it become life? When does it become sentient? And then it's also like, well, when does it become an adult? When does it transition from a child to an adult? And you can go by biology, but biology doesn't really help because it's a gradual process, biology. I mean, you can go by the religious argument, which is, that's fine. But even then, it's not always super clear, and not everyone's religious. So it's like, what do you do? So you kind of have to just make do with what you got. You have to put hard lines in the sand where you can, because you need to, because otherwise you have bad actors who will take advantage of children. And let me present my argument for my. If I had to ever debate anyone on the age of consent, I would say, I would pivot on a moral argument, because I think the moral argument is much stronger than the conventional argument or the normative argument or the shouldn't be or the emotional heartstring argument. It's really, we have a moral obligation to protect the children of our society. Everyone can agree, yeah, we should protect children from unnecessary harm. Okay. When children are children, when they are young, they lack the two necessary faculties to properly process sex. So that's puberty, right? If they're prepubescent, then they obviously have no meaningful understanding of what sex is. Like, they're just like, ew, like, what is that? Like, they don't get it. They see a woman with tits and they're like, they just don't get it, right? So there's the prepubescent point, which is just like literally these, like, do you have the sexual artillery per se, right? Do you have the equipment, and is it activated? But there's also a mental component, which I think is why you don't see the age of consent right at like 13 or 14. There's a mental component which helps you process, integrate, and understand and accept and partake in sex. So there's a whole mental component around sex that I would probably say begins at puberty. So here's kind of my understanding of how humans evolve sexually. At about 12 or 13, supposed to be, it can be earlier, can be later, depending on how many hormones you ingest and what kind of food you eat and what culture you live in your genetics. But around 11 to 13, you have children partake in the, also depends on your nutrients, puberty, which is the beginning of the physical sexual component, which becomes activated. But that also initiates a slower, much slower process. I don't know how long actual puberty itself takes, because there's different components to it. There's the muscle development, there's the bone development, there's the height, there's the jaw, there's the voice, there's the genitalia and the sexual organs and their activation and lactation and all this stuff. So they all kind of operate asynchronously. So it's hard to exactly say. But there's a point where it all begins. It's like, all right, now we're going to start. And what's important to note is that I'd say the mental faculty, the mental component, the prefrontal cortex, and the capacity to understand and perceive sex as something that just isn't traumatic, because your brain starts off perceiving sex as gross and traumatic, which is necessary to prevent children from engaging with sex because it's dangerous, right? I mean, that's why when you're young and you see something sexual, you see it as gross, right? Because you need that disgust reaction as a child to prevent you from accidentally engaging in otherwise harmful prepubescent sex, which is dangerous for many reasons. So yeah, there's a transition, and these different faculties all happen. I would say they initiate at the same time. So you start getting taller. Your bones start growing out. You get more hair. You get your voice deepens. You get your Adam's apple. You get more muscle development. Your genitalia, right? Lactation if you're a woman. All this shit, right? And but they all kind of complete, or they all happen at different rates. So they don't always all happen at the exact same time. And then at the very end of that, there's a mental component, which is how your brain interprets sex and how it functions with sex, and how you healthily integrate sex into your life. And then that happens the slowest. I would say that maybe happens all the way up until 20s. I would say that process continues all the way to your 20s. It's like if you imagine like something ripening, like a fruit, you could kind of view it that way. There's different things that need to ripen. There's the outside skin of the fruit that needs to ripen. Then there's the stem. Then there's the color. Then there's the moisture. Then there's the seeds inside. And they all develop at different rates. Maybe the seeds take the longest. You got to develop the seeds to last. Maybe the seeds keep growing. They always keep growing. So what you're really doing with the age of consent and the moral quandary is, if you engage sexually with a child who is underdeveloped, then it leads to trauma and harm. And what's important to note is, just because the actual physical component of their genitalia or sexual organs being activated, just because that part's ready and ripe, doesn't necessarily mean that the mental faculty is ready and ripe. And it can still lead to a lot of trauma if their brain has not developed to actually process sex. So you're really waiting on those two components. You're waiting on the physical portion to be ready. That one should be fairly obvious. But really where people get skewed is they think, well, she's ready at puberty. She's ready. Well, no. I would say at puberty, it's the beginning of where your brain starts to integrate sex, and it's a long process. It takes multiple years for you to slowly evolve your brain to the point where it's mature enough to comprehend and properly integrate, understand, accept, and partake in sexual acts without causing trauma. And we have a moral obligation to protect children from that kind of trauma and that unnecessary harm. And the only way to do that is with a hard line in the sand called the age of consent. And 18, I don't know why 18 exactly. I kind of think it's a normative number, like Charlie said at the very beginning, where it's evolved from, well, you completed education, you completed high school, you can do all these other things, you can vote, you can be drafted, blah, blah, blah. We just kind of picked the line in the sand. But the reason it's 18 and not 14, right? Because you can say, well, most people they've hit puberty by 14. It's like, have you ever heard of second puberty? Have you ever heard of the fact that puberty is a process? It takes multiple years, and all these things are happening at different rates. That's really what you're worried about, right? So You got to wait for that mental portion. You got to wait a couple of years, right? You got to wait 5-6 years maybe for that mental portion to really catch up to the point where you are mentally ready to actually enter a relationship and a marriage, potentially with someone who's way older than you. That's the other part too. That's why there's Romeo and Juliet laws. It's like you have to be ready for a 60-year-old, because once you're 18, the law can't protect you anymore from normal sexual encounters. So you got to be prepared as an 18-year-old for some 60-year-old dude, right? So that's why it's 18 as well, and not like 16, right? In some areas, I think 16 is way too low. If I'm in my opinion, I think we should raise it at least to 18 everywhere, like period. Maybe even 20. Like, I don't know. But yeah, it's unfortunate to see the Islamic culture taking over Sneako's brain and making him spit this kind of nonsense. And the very simple rebuttal to Sneako, were I in this debate right now, talking to Sneako, I would just simply say, how do you legally prosecute the guy who rapes the 9-year-old? How do you solve that, Sneako? How does your society protect 9-year-olds from being raped?
And what is an adult now?
Okay. We'll use your age. Someone who is 25. Is it okay for someone who is in their 20s to marry a 15 or 16-year-old? And let me explain, when you're doing your arguments, it's coming from an adult. I've never heard you say, like, 2 teenagers should be able to marry. Like, I haven't heard that with these takes. I'm talking about someone in your position in the 20s. Is it okay for you to marry a 15 or 16-year-old?
But teenager, even bringing up this term that has nothing to do with child and adult. So there's 2 phases. You're a child, and then you physically mature.
I don't know why you can't just
your
answer
body
that
becomes.
directly.
I'm saying the difference between a child and adult is when you're physically and when you're biologically, when you're mentally ready to have kids. That's the teenager is not even. So you added another term in this. It goes child and then adult. You mature, and then you're physically ready.
Well, I didn't add it. You
I agree with Sneako, yeah. But he's saying that narrative means therefore there's no age of consent, which is dumb.
Not in 2 16-year-olds. We were talking about an adult and a 15 or 16-year-old. I was not the one that brought this into the equation.
Right. If it's illegal, if it's illegal, because we believe in Islam, we believe that we should obey the law of the land. If that's illegal, okay. if that's not permissible, then we don't do it. We don't break the law.
But we're not. I'm talking about your personal beliefs. Do you think someone in their 20s should be able to marry a 15 or 16-year-old?
It's so bad though. Like, come on, Charlie, you could push him so much harder than this. Do you think a 30-year-old man should be legally allowed to marry a 9-year-old? In your perfect world, Sneako, in your hypothetical reality based on your morality, how would you stop 30-year-olds from dating 9-year-olds? What law would you use?
In their 20s should be. I mean, I personally wouldn't do it. I don't know many people who would do it. The maturity for people and the teenagers in the West is getting much worse, but there are...
We're talking globally. Let's just talk globally. Like, do you think it is okay for... I'm not talking about just you specifically anymore. Anyone. Do you think it's okay for anyone in their 20s, an adult, to marry a 15 or 16-year-old?
A 21-year-old, if there was a marriage where the father consented and the daughter consented, and it was both good on both families and they wanted to do it, why am I going to get involved? Why should we get the government involved?
Well,
why would I tell them if everybody's consenting, if everybody's okay with it, if the parents are okay with it, if nobody's being harmed, if it's going to...
Yeah, and this is really the basis of Sneako's argument, which is that he doesn't want the government to be governing relationships. He wants this to be down to the father. He wants the religion to govern it, and he wants individuals to... It's just a very different cultural attitude towards relationships in general. And it's like, who's better? I don't know. You know, maybe there's an argument that the West isn't super great, but it's like you would have to reorganize the entirety of the culture of the West, because we actually have a legal system. We have a legal process that kind of governs everything, and you can't just leave it up to the families to act rationally and protect their daughters. You can't really do that. Like, you need a way to prosecute the pedophile who tries to rape the 9-year-old. You actually need some kind of legal arm to actually enforce that doesn't happen. Here in the West, we can't just rely on our like fellow Muhammad Islam Brudas from just like going out and stoning rapists to prevent rapists from happening. I don't know, like, it's a completely different society.
It'd be okay if they're both abiding by by the rules and they're not hurting each other, why not?
But they're still like they're at best a sophomore in high school. They can't consent to something like that. Like, do you think a
Okay, so now it's
16-year-old can
sophomore in
consent to
high
something
school
like that?
versus senior in high school. What's the difference? Like, what's the difference
I'm
maturity
just saying,
wise?
like, I'm giving you a perspective on where that age would be in life. Like, they can't consent to something like that.
That's
do you
not. That's
think differently,
probably
I guess?
you're bringing up an outlier. That's probably not going to happen as much. I'm saying that these are arbitrary reasons to say like a sophomore versus a senior in high school. How much different were you really maturity wise? It wasn't that much of a difference. The reason that you keep saying 18 is because in California, where they post Hollywood movies, it's 18. And so everybody across the world, this is the standard that we believe in. This is the correct age, exactly on the dot. And if it's anything under that, are you going to say here that if a 21-year-old got married to a 17-year-old who was almost 18, is that 20?
I guess I'll update my position or expound upon it. The moral quandary of the age of consent is not actually on the age of consent. The moral quandary is on protecting children, right? So I actually don't personally see anything wrong with a 18-year-old with a 16-year-old if the 16-year-old just happens to be super mature and they went through puberty at a really young age and they are super mature and developed. I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing in of itself. However, you still need the age of consent to protect children, right? So you need this age. Like in an isolated incident, I could say, oh, but she went through puberty when she was 10 and she went through a bunch of like stuff, and she grew up on a farm and had to do all this work, and she's super mature and she's only 16 but she's fully mature, she's super smart and capable, and some weird biological phenomenon happened where her brain developed and matured faster at the age of 16. Sure, I'm not going to argue. What my point I'm trying to make is that the morality of the age of consent is not about the specific age, it's about protecting children, and it kind of necessitates the age of consent. Through our legal system, it necessitates it. So like the moral part of it doesn't focus on the actual age, it focuses on protecting children, really, and the age of consent is a necessary tool to protect children.
21-year-old a pedophile?
I would say that is a morally bad thing to do for sure.
Not morally bad. Not morally bad. Is that?
I wouldn't call them a pedophile.
So when does somebody become a pedophile?
I would say when you have this position, you're
not answering the question.
I'm explaining it.
Okay.
When you are in your 20s and you start preying upon someone who is still a child, a 15, 16, 14, anything under 18, a 21 and a 17-year-old.
But you still haven't specifically defined what a child is.
I did.
So then why? Okay, there you go. So if pedophile is love of children, and your definition of adult starts at 18, if the 21-year-old marries a 17-year-old who's turning 18 tomorrow, he is a pedophile based off your definition.
Well, yes, he would be, because the definition of a child is defined legally. The word child is also, it's defined by prepubescent, that's correct. It's defined by biology, but it's also defined by the legal. So yes, it is literally just a definitional, by definition, they are a pedophile, yes.
Definition.
As I said, if he would wait, he would not be. Then
well, not wait. Based off your definition, that person's
in that position, there is no reason to not wait for the legally established, agreed upon definition.
This is weird. Charlie can't make the argument. I guess he's been intimidated, I guess.
Of when you stop being a child.
Okay, so now we get into the question of whether the pedophile thing, is that a moral answer or a legal answer? Because it seems like morally, it's pretty much, okay, it's almost there. That morally, that's not a pedophile. Legally, it is. But those are two different things.
Yes. You're right, Sneako. It's weird that he's taking the position of not believing in the age of consent. What he's really arguing is he's arguing for a different culture to protect children, which is Islam. He's saying we shouldn't really need an age of consent as a legal function to protect children. We should just rely on the fathers governing marriage. And whatever else, whether Islamic, Quran related stuff he wants to help protect children. I guess I can kind of understand that. That's a better argument than like I want to date 15-year-olds.
But they don't need to be.
Yes,
They can coexist. You recognize that, right?
No.
Like,
Then that's when you muddy up morality with the law. Now you're allowing the government to determine morality, and that's where things get muddied up. Because if they changed it with like they did before, like 200 years ago in the 1800s when it was the age of 10, that was fine. Legally back then, they were not a pedophile. Today, legally, they are a pedophile. There's no consistency there.
But
You can't allow the government to determine morality because it changes all the time. Tomorrow, if the U.S. government legalized bestiality, if the government legalized incest, based off your logic, there'd be no reason why that's wrong. Can I ask you, Moist, do you think that incest is wrong?
Yes.
Why is incest wrong?
There is under no circumstances any excuse for anyone of the same bloodline to be romantic like that.
That's not an argument. I mean, Sneako's actually probably he's going deeper intellectually than MoistCritikal is. MoistCritikal has been basically making normative claims and arguments this entire debate and just kind of virtue signaling. Whereas Sneako is kind of getting to the crux of the issue, but he's misconstrued it. I guess he just doesn't accept the idea that the age of consent is a necessary tool to protect children from pedophiles, especially in the current society we live in. I don't know how he doesn't see that. Like if I ask Sneako, okay, Sneako, how do you protect the 9-year-old from getting fucked? How do you prosecute the pedophile? Like I don't know what his answer would be. I don't know how his society, or how in the West at least, how in America he would solve that. Is he advocating for a deconstruction of the age of consent? Or is he advocating for like a completely different society with completely different culture, completely different rules? Because that's what it sounds like.
By no means at all.
Why?
I really think it should be pretty obvious why.
I don't know why. I'm asking.
Incest? Why is incest wrong? It's an abuse of the teleos of sex, which is that sex is for procreation, and procreating with someone of your own bloodline leads to genetic deformities and imperfections and the degradation of your own bloodline, which is against the teleos of sex, of reproduction. And yeah, it's just an abuse overall of your imperative. And also God said it, and God said it. There you go, God said.
I know where you're going with this because I've heard this argument from another streamer before about like the ethics of incest. If they don't have a kid and thus don't pass down like bad genes that lead to a...
And yeah, this is kind of the problem, is like sex is innate by the ontology of sex is that of procreation. It's not just that, well, what if you have sex but it doesn't actually lead to a kid? What if I have protection? It's the nature of sex itself pivots and orbits and centers around the concept of procreation. So you can't divorce the concept of procreation from sex. You really can't. Because, and you see this in the way that women behave when they're on contraceptives. You see this in the way it affects people's psychology when they have sex and when their pair bonding breaks and different hormone releases. And just because you literally don't have a kid when you have sex, it still affects you as though you're trying to create a family in many ways. And it affects the way your brain works. It affects your biology, affects your physiology, affects your hormones. And why? Because the very nature and telos of sex is that of procreation. And therefore, using it to procreate with someone of your own brood, of your own family, is innately immoral because it's an abuse of its purpose. And it leads to negative consequences. I'm not a consequentialist, right? But I mean, if you were, I know a lot of people are, you could even make the consequentialist argument.
A bad child. I've heard this before.
But I want to hear your answer, because are we going with legal or are we going to follow some sort of morality, sort of consistent morality? Why is incest wrong?
Incest is wrong because I believe that no family dynamic should ever include a sexual relation.
Why?
I don't think that, because it is not healthy. It is a bad thing to do. It is a horrible thing to subject someone to.
But why is it horrible? Because who told you that?
It's what I believe. And
He's just circular there. This is the most circular, rambling. Wow, how weak MoistCritikal fucking argumentation is. This is really unfortunate to see that someone this popular is going to go on a debate. This is kind of the problem, is people think Sneako's an idiot. They're like, oh, Sneako's a fucking clown. Because Sneako has all these bad takes. And then they go on to debate Sneako thinking that, oh, I'm MoistCritikal. I'm based. I'm going to, I have truth on my side. Age of consent is right. But if you're not willing to actually engage with the topic seriously, you're actually just going to lose. Because even though he's kind of taking the dangerous position, he understands kind of the argument a lot better than Moist does.
also, if you do have a child with your own kin, the child suffers.
Okay, but say it's two brothers, two gay brothers, Chris Tyson and
Yeah. Okay. So basically, yeah, that's why you can't really use the consequentialist argument for incest, because they can just say, oh, well, what if it's between two brothers, or what if they're wearing a condom? Now is it immoral? You know what I mean? So you have to make the teleological argument, which is that it's an abuse of it's a violation of the purpose of sex, or you could just use the God argument and just say God said no, boom. God, a Giga Chat argument right there. Just say, well, God said no, I win.
other Chris Tyson.
Just quote mine from the Bible.
And Chris, if they're two brothers and they decide to be in a no, genuine question. It's what you believe in. I want to figure out where your beliefs come from. You personally believe that.
My beliefs come from a place of what I believe to be moral,
So normative, impulse-driven, intuitive morals. Okay.
I don't believe that anyone in the same family has
Why?
any position to be romantic with one another. I don't think
So
that's a
your
healthy
morality
dynamic.
comes from yourself?
My morality comes from like the world around me. I don't have.
Okay, so
brothers or
if
It's
sisters.
actually
morality-
weird. He's floundering on where he gets his morality from. He actually doesn't know. That's weird. That's someone to be like, what's your morality based in? I don't know. Ask any empiricist. Ask any agnostic where they get their morality from. I don't know.
It comes from the world around you. Then, by your logic, if you lived in America in the 1800s where the age of 10 was okay, and where the age of 7 was okay in England just 200 years ago, if you followed the world around you, that would be okay. That was fine.
Yes, he's a sheep. And yeah, if he was in England in the 1800s, he would just follow the normative claim of, or the standard, the status quo of the 1800s. Yep, because his morality is that of the status quo.
Fine.
And it's not now because we've evolved past them. Like
Right.
we are significantly further along to recognize this was a bad thing. People evolve.
But wait a minute, MoistCritikal. You're basically conceding to Sneako's point that if we were in the 1800s and we were less evolved, then you would partake in that morality, right? Because they hadn't evolved yet. So back in the 1800s, they weren't evolved. So you would actually justify their morality system under the pretext that they had not yet evolved the better morality. The same way, because basically what you would then have to say is you would have to say our current morality would be superseded by a more evolved reality. And the same way that you view the age of consent being age 10 in the 1800s, you would view that with contempt. You would have to then, using foresight, say that future you, 200 years from now, would view yourself with contempt and as an immoral, disgusting beast, which you would have to, meaning that your morality is groundless and actually you're immoral by your 200-year in the future evolved self. Boom.
Like people like here we'll go even stupider with this.
So your morality,
Like the Targaryen-
is ever changing. It changes with
Yes,
the people.
morality is changing. Like you don't.
What the fuck? Morality changes according to what? According to what? Let me hear this.
You are not born and then stay the same the entire time. As you take in more information,
Okay.
as you grow, so does your understanding
Okay,
of the world.
so-
That's how it
so
should
let's-
be.
let's see where this
Opinions
goes.
Change,
Let's see where this-
perspectives change.
Okay, let's say
That's a weird perspective. That's really weird. I've never heard anyone say that. I don't even know what his argument really is. He's saying morality is just subjective, that we make it up, and morality is evolved from your consciousness, from your understanding. Like, he doesn't see morality as something that's discovered or something that's innate to the universe or something that's universal. It's something that's evolved as your brain gets smarter, that you build out of thin air. This is weird.
It's like we continue this, and morality is ever changing. And then you, Moist Critical, you're living in America, and now everyone around you now believes incest is okay, as long as you don't have a child that's going to come out deformed. You have,
and yes, Sneako's actually right, and this is a big problem I have, is that all these people who are like, oh yeah, pedophilia is evil, it's evil, it's evil. I'm like, yeah, well, when the law changes, when the corrupt Hollywood sexual billionaire class finally deems it legal to fuck and diddle kids, you'll all be right there with them, supporting them. You know, oh, you can't discriminate against me, and you just hate love, and yeah, there will be a lot of people like Moist Critical who just jump onto the bandwagon of whatever the culture dictates to be moral or not. And it's really important that people actually develop more complex, more resilient, resistant, grounded beliefs than this clown Moist Critical right here. Because then, yeah, they will. Sneako's right. Sneako is right. People will just cave to whatever the current cultural mores is at the time, and it's really bad, because I think this is going to happen with pedophilia in the next 10 to 15 years. I think you're going to see a big cultural shift towards promoting pedophilia, probably under the branch of the LGBTQ as another identity. And there's many ways they could do it. That's the problem.
I would disagree with it.
So your morality does not come from those around you. It comes from somewhere. If your morality comes from around you, you would agree with everybody that's there. You would agree with the government. You would agree with the law of the land. Where would you get?
Everyone has their own individuality.
Individuality has nothing to do with morals. Your personal.
It does, because your morals are formed from your personal experiences.
No, they're not. No, they're not. If that were true, then how come we all share the same foundation for morals? How come we could make moral arguments? Because according to that argument, Moist Critical, you would basically have to say morality is subjective, and therefore you couldn't contest with someone else's morality because it's a subjective, evolved thing, kind of like your personal experience. If you're saying it's from your personal experience, you're basically saying it's uncontestable, and then there's no way to assert whose morality is right or wrong, because it's really just an individual subjective preference, which is not how morality works. Because if I have a certain... this is fucking secularism coming in and ruining the brains of these people. Basically, if you hold your own morality as just subjective to you, then there's no way it can translate universally to all individuals, because you would have no way... It's like when Andrew Wilson was debating Not So Erudite, and it's these Christian secularists, dude. They're fucking disgusting. This is not how morality works. Morality is not subjective. It applies universally, because you think about it. You can judge somebody for doing something you deem immoral, but how could you do that if maybe they're just operating under their own individual moral system that they've evolved under their own personal experience through their subjective experience? Maybe they're older than you. They're an adult. They've lived more lived experience than you. You know, they've evolved their morality further than you have, because they're 30. They're older than you. So does that make their choice to diddle kids, diddle the 9-year-old, okay? How can you contest with someone else's morality, Moist Critical, if it's a subjective thing evolved through individuals' personal experience? That's nonsense.
And from what you take in around you, from the people around you.
Okay, but if you take it in from the people around you, then incest would be okay if everybody was doing it.
If you personally didn't agree with it, it wouldn't be. Like, if you want, like, I don't know why you're doing the argument a little incorrectly, but I know where you're trying to go. But the point is, like, the fact of the matter is, people...
Word salad? Stalling?
Will always have their own perspectives on things, unless, of course, you just follow what you are told.
Yeah, but they're wrong. They're wrong. This is how you just. And there's this argument. I don't even know what this argument. It's a fallacy. It's really a fallacy. I don't know what you would call this fallacy, but it's like there's ambiguity and there's a lack of consensus in the way that people operate. Therefore, there is no objective truth. Therefore, everything's just subjective. Therefore, everything is random. Therefore, morality is just, it's evolved, it's made up. Everyone has their own individual morality. No, there's no truth. There's my truth. It's like, no, this is not true. This is goofy. This is secularist, agnostic, hooble habble. Be gone.
100% of the time. Like for you, you're pushing back against the age of consent because you don't like being told that this is what it is based on this. You believe that, well, actually, there's a couple other extenuating circumstances in these cases.
No, you're dumb. You're dumb. This is so dumb. Wow. So, Moist is trying to argue that Sneako has his own individual morality, which is different from mine. The difference, MoistCritikal, is that Sneako's morality is not based on subjective, evolved experience. It's based on a set of rules. I would hope so. Please, Sneako. But that's the idea. Is like my morality, for example, is better than yours, different from yours, because it's not just evolved by personal preference and experience and what I've learned and I don't develop my morality. It's something that's discovered and logically built upon and uncovered. So it has a grounding, meaning I can't just decide to change it at a fucking whim.
Cases.
That's not what I believe in. My belief comes from something that's consistent. It comes from the Islamic way. It comes from the Islamic way because nothing else makes sense. The Western way is always adapting, and now we allow people to change their genders, something that was admonishable only 10 years ago. See, you're following the ever-changing morality. Only 10 years ago, a man becoming a woman was a mental illness. It was something that was shamed upon. 10 years ago, if Chris Tyson was going on a Mr. Beast video and he was there dressed up like a girl, and he was saying that I'm taking puberty blockers, hormone blockers, everybody would admonish him. In a lot of places, he would be excommunicated. He would say, absolutely, I do not want kids to take hormone blockers and change themselves forever. But today, that's allowed. Today, that's pushed. Today, that's okay. And then everybody else kind of falls into suit. There are a small minority of people in the West, people that believe in God, they say that this is absolutely wrong, and then they get banned for it. You can't follow the people that are around you, the ever-changing morality.
You can't follow a line of questioning. You keep going off onto these tangents. Look, at the end of the day, man.
It's not a tangent.
Fucking MoistCritikal is the biggest word salad debater I've ever seen in my life. He's just like, hey man, slow down. What I'm trying to say is...
You can believe whatever you want to believe, but the point is, people are always going.
No. You cannot believe just whatever you want to believe. You cannot.
You are doing.
If you believe bestiality is wrong, you should not be in society. If you believe incest is okay, you should not be within the community. You should be excommunicated. These are things that there's some certain morality that should supersede the government. That should supersede something. The government should not.
The age of consent for you?
It's not the age of consent. It's.
You should stay on topic here. Because
I'm staying on topic.
What you are doing is you are deflecting to other topics. You have still not directly said that it.
Not really. I mean, he's trying to point out why your morality system doesn't work, which is pivotal to your age of consent argument. So not really.
You think it is a bad thing for an adult to marry a child? Like you are still unable to say that. Now,
but you haven't even defined child.
I have. My definition is anything under 18.
That's exactly what a child is.
Yeah, I think that is a great line in the sand. If you are under 18, you are a child.
It's not a great line in the sand. But that's not even the definition of child. You're
who
going
cares?
off of your
Who
own
cares,
definition.
Though? Who cares?
Who cares?
Like who cares? Yes. Why? If 18 is the established point, you are out of high school going to college. If that is the point where everyone has agreed you're an adult past this point, why argue against it?
Why argue? Because if the government decides to push the age of high school, if they try to lower it, if they said that you can vote at a different age, then your morality changes based off of the law. And I'm saying that you need to have a consistent morality that does not change with the government and that does not change with the people that live in your country. It has to supersede that. You can't just say because of high school.
Yeah, Sneako's right. I agree. He's right, but that doesn't mean we need to get rid of the age of consent, because the age of consent is not a moral quandary. It's not. diddling kids is a moral quandary, and traumatizing children who are prepubescent and who don't have the mental faculties, that is the moral quandary, not the actual age of consent being 18. That line in the sand is not a moral point. It is a ethical government legal point made to help protect children. It is a governmental aid to help protect children. But the actual physical age of consent itself, the actual law, is not a moral thing. Because you're right, they could change it to 17. That doesn't change the morality. They're not tethered.
School, because of college, this is the set in stone age forever.
Okay, I want you, Sneako, to set an age in stone right now for the age of consent, age of marriage. What is that to you?
I told you that there is no age of marriage. It has to be
Now,
based off maturity, and it has to be based off of whether it's going to be harmful, and it has to be based off the consent of the parents. It has to be healthy. Who decides that? If I want to marry a girl, I have to first ask her father. I have to ask her brother.
And the father's perfect. The father knows what's best for the child at all times.
And I have to ask her mother, and the daughter has to consent. If all three parties are consenting, and then my family's consenting, that's fine. That's what a marriage should be based upon.
Well. The mother is just gonna fucking say whatever the father says. So I don't know about that. In practice, I'm not sure how that works. And can the daughter really consent? You know, isn't the dad just gonna? It's really up to the dad and you. Can we agree?
Okay. All that happens, and it's a 14-year-old. Now what?
If the 14-year-old is mature and I'm 16, say I went through puberty as well,
you're not 16,
and I'm 17 or I'm 18. See, the problem with this is that you have a specific idea of where.
No, Sneako should commit to his point. Really, he should stop pussyfooting around it because he's been doing a little bit of that. Yeah, if you're 20 and you're dating a 14-year-old, Sneako, just say, yeah, it's okay, right? Be consistent, right?
The ages, but if I'm 17 and I'm mature and I meet a 14, a 15-year-old and I'm okay, I'm mature, my family's okay, I asked the daughter, I asked the daughter's father for the hand of marriage.
You're in your 20s.
I went on this already.
Does it change?
Your scenario earlier was if a 16 and a 21-year-old, both parties were if the father was okay with it, the mother was okay with it, why not? Give me a reason why tell me a reason why that's wrong. Because you're getting
one is a child, one is not a child. That's the point. So the 14-year-old, all of those criteria we just checked, you're in your 20s.
The definition that we just agreed upon, that's not true. Child is somebody that is not physically mature yet. It has nothing to do with 18. That's not
what we agreed upon. We agreed upon 18.
You agreed.
We
didn't agree with that.
Agreed at 18.
That's not true. That's not true across the whole world.
Sensible people, even your own community.
Yeah. They're just kind of going in circles for like. I'll probably cut some of this out, maybe, or not. I don't care. Like that's the thing is if people want to watch the whole debate, they probably won't. They'll just click out after a certain point, but. I'll leave it all up. Why not?
Has agreed upon 18 for the most part. So I've seen a lot of the tweets when you go on these tangents. Most people say it should be 18, and Sneako's arguing that parts of the world are different, so it gets muddy. But the agreed upon for the majority of people is 18.
That's not true. That's just not true across the world.
So you see when you argue against that, why it looks so weird. Do you understand that?
Yeah, I understand because people have been brainwashed with this. Let me ask you this: people in Europe,
brainwashing is concerning.
Okay. So the majority of Europe is 16. Is everybody in Europe who abides by that, who abides by the law, are they pedophiles?
Yeah, in my eyes, 100%. And in European society, too.
Fine.
If you have someone in their 20s that is fucking and marrying a 16-year-old, they, too, are excommunicated.
No, not excommunicated. Are they pedophiles?
Yeah, I would say yes.
They're pedophiles? Okay, so the majority of people that follow the law in Europe are pedophiles according to MoistCritikal.
If
yes,
they are,
it's
if
a yes or no.
they are an adult fucking an under 18-year-old, even if it's 16 legally, I would say yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And in America, the majority of the states...
This isn't really a good stance for MoistCritikal to take, because he's basically saying his morality, his universal prescription of a pedophile to someone's name is on the number 18, which is kind of retarded.
It's 16. Are those people who follow the law of the land... Are they pedophiles for following the? So the majority.
Keep saying
yeah. Okay. Let me clarify. People need to understand that the age of consent itself, the age 18, is not. It's not what makes you a moral or immoral person. That's not. The morality does not pivot around the age of consent itself. You don't become a bad person because she's 17 in 364 days. It's a legal tool right? So the age of consent is a legal mechanism to help enforce this moral principle, right? Because you need some way to translate moral ideas to legal principles and legal laws, right? So the law itself is not a moral thing. It is a tool that we use in society to help us enact a moral principle. So there's not so it's kind of dumb for Charlie to tether himself to the age of 18.
That's what it is. The majority of
It's not.
states, it's 16.
If I want you right now, Sneako. If you go to any of those states where it's 16 and you fuck a 16-year-old, it's statutory rape. It is still statutory rape. It doesn't apply. That's not what that means. That's not how that works.
We went in circles. The Romeo and Juliet laws don't apply for most people. And even without that, even without the Romeo and Juliet laws, if it was 16 and all the countries that are 16, are those people pedophiles?
As I just said, yes.
Okay.
In those countries too.
Okay.
But
do you realize what you're saying? What you are saying,
in those countries,
most people who follow, what you're saying, based off this logic, most people in the world are pedophiles if they follow the law.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
If the law is under 18, I would say yes.
Okay. So, but that's not the law, because most of the world, as we established, most of the world is not 18. So you're saying if the majority of the world follows the law and they exercise their rights, they do exactly what they're good citizens, and they follow the law where it's 16, you are saying the majority of the world contains pedophiles. Even if they don't even act upon it, even if they agree that, okay, one day, maybe I could, out of wedlock, I could fuck a 16-year-old.
Because those
just the thought.
But yes, if there is an adult, as I've said many times, if there is an adult.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of based. What he's basically doing is he's deconstructing Charlie's absurd morality that somehow the morality of the age of consent is around the actual age itself, which is fucking stupid.
And I'm defining an adult as someone who is.
We know.
We'll go deeper. We'll make it even simpler. Your age. If there is someone that is your age and they are fucking a 16-year-old.
Why my age now? I thought it was 18. I thought it was 18.
I just gave a number because you were.
But you gave a number earlier.
18.
You said 18.
18. Yeah, I was just trying to make it easier. 18. If there is an adult that is fucking a 16-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Let me take a little aside here for people who are getting into logical debates and want to. If you're not losing, like if you're really convinced, if you're actually like logically sound, like you're convinced in your points, I would advise you be as charitable as possible. Because it will help you it will keep you from arguing over things that are not home runs. It'll keep you from arguing things that are not actually the main point of contention, the main pillar of their argument and your argument. You want to get down to the point where you think you can beat them. Like, for example, I think I could beat both these guys because I understand fundamentally, which Sneako also does too, that the morality of the age of consent is not on the age itself, because that's a legal proposition to help enforce the actual morality, which is we shouldn't be diddling and traumatizing kids, right? And he says, oh, the definition of a kid. And, yeah, so Moist doesn't quite understand that. So in these debates, if I was Sneako and you're trying to uncover that to MoistCritikal, you don't want to argue over the specifics of his random hypothetical. Like, just let him make his hypothetical, because one, it will make you look better, and it will help the audience, it'll make your attacks more poignant. Because if you attack all the time on every single point, you never give any ground, you just kind of look like an asshole. And then maybe when it's on an actually important pillar, an actually important issue, it's not quite as poignant, and you might lose some of the audience, you might lose your opponent, and it may not get through as well. It's part of debating is being an effective communicator, right? Something I've definitely had to work on myself. So you want to concede as much as you can, generally, without looking weak, without conceding important things. You don't want to concede important things, but if it's like the hypothetical, just let them. You know what I mean? It just speeds the argument up, helps you get down to the nitty-gritty without getting bogged down in stupid details.
Even in a country where it says 16 is okay, then yes, absolutely. Now, in the case of the 18, 16-year-old, that's where Romeo and Juliet kicks in. But if it is someone in their 20s, in their 30s, fucking a 16-year-old, that is literally statutory rape in pretty much everywhere in the world.
Right. Based off your logic, you realize this, that if a 19-year-old has sex with a 17-year-old, they should go to jail. They're pedophiles.
That is Romeo and Juliet, and unless it's an 18, then yeah, wait till they're 18.
Okay, but a lot of states don't even have Romeo and Juliet. In Europe, they don't have that. The places, your Romeo and Juliet is an American thing. And in Europe, a lot of these places, if a 19-year-old has sex with a 17-year-old, your logic, they should go to jail. Is that true?
Why 19 and 17? You could say 18 and 17 through 64.
I think it is absolutely going to be one of those things where there's an agreed upon age. If it's 18, it's 18.
So yes,
follow it.
A 19-year-old in a relationship with a 17-year-old should go to jail.
Well, no, okay. I guess like I said, it will all depend on where that is located. So to give an example, Call Me Carson and that, I think it was a 17-year-old, I think he was 19 and 17. Like, that could be a high school relationship. And I don't remember where that took place, but the big problem there is apparently he was getting nudes. That's child porn. Like, that's a huge issue. 19 and 17, that's only a 2-year age gap. So that is applicable under things like Romeo and Juliet. So even if it is under 18 in the place you come from, that's an extenuating circumstance. But that's not what we're talking about. You keep bringing it back down to reasonable places. But what you argue for is things like when you legally can drive, you can legally get married and have sex.
Yes, when you are physically mature, when you're ready to drive a car, you should be able to. There's a lot of people that have jobs that need to do things. A lot of people aren't ready to drive cars. They're not physically, they're not mentally mature yet to drive a car. They shouldn't drive a car at 16. It should be based off maturity. The same thing has to do with sex. The reason I keep saying this is because you have these set in stone numbers, and if you were to lay the law of the land, if we follow your laws, if we follow your criteria, a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old, he's consenting, she's consenting, the parents are happy, they're happy, they want to get married, they're ready to go, you're putting them in jail. That doesn't make any sense. Because of this,
Romeo and Juliet kicks in. Like, I don't know what's hard to understand about that. Places where that doesn't exist, I guess I'm not too familiar with how those cases go. A lot of places they don't. And this is why it's arbitrary. So and based off your standards, when is the Romeo and Juliet? How long can that extend? Those are teenagers. A 17 and a 19-year-old, those are both teenagers.
Okay, now they're teenagers, but you just said 18 was an adult.
Yes, they are.
You see how the definitions keep changing? They keep changing. So far in this conversation, you changed it so many times. You said 18's an adult. No, you said, but listen, because you did. I heard you double up a couple times.
I know what you're going to harp on here.
No, you did. You said 18's an adult, and then you said adults, like you. Because you think 25's an adult now. Because that's when you're. Why? So why is it? Let me ask you this. Why is it not 20? Why is it not 25?
It's because that's not what was established. Like,
no, I'm asking you because you believe in personal beliefs. I believe in some. My morality comes from the Quran. You believe in personal beliefs. Why is it not 25? 25 is when the frontal cortex is fully developed. That's when you're done maturing.
It's actually true.
I couldn't tell you why it's not 25. I have no clue. I don't know why the drinking age is 21. I don't know.
Really, you don't? Yeah, that one's a pretty obvious one. You should know. There's plenty of history around that. MAD, for example, drunk driving. It was younger basically, and then they upped it because there were a bunch of drunken incidents and problems, and alcohol was kind of a national concern in the country, so they upped it. Basically, it used to be lower, but they decided that alcohol was one of those things where you needed to be a little more mature handling alcohol, so they upped it.
But they are agreed upon rules.
They're agreed upon rules, just like the drinking age, just like the voting age. They're agreed upon rules, and a lot of them don't make any sense. Why is drinking 21?
18, but I do think 18 does. There is a good reason for it. You are out of high school. You are going to live on your own. You're going to college.
Well, okay, here's how I would reply. I would say, yeah, the age of consent does make sense. It makes as much sense as it can. Meaning, they had to pick a line in the sand. The line in the sand is arbitrary. It's ad hoc. There's no reason for it, really, other than we need a line in the sand. We need one. Borders, another one. No real reason for borders to be where they are, really. Why does this shrub have to be American soil and this one have to be Canadian? That's stupid. But we need borders because otherwise we don't have countries. And we can't protect our land. And all land bleeds into one another, and then we can't have governments We can't have states and countries break down. So you need borders. Same with children. Same with adults. Same with the age of consent. Is you need a structure. And 18 seemed to be the most sensible one. It seemed to be the best number, apparently.
College. I think that is a good reason.
Yeah, maybe in the 1980s, but nowadays people don't leave the house until 24, 25, until they're my age. A lot of people don't. People are not financially ready. People are still immature. There's 18-year-olds I know that are more mature than people my age, and there's 25-year-olds that are more immature than 18-year-olds. It's arbitrary now. It depends on personal experience. It depends on individual maturity.
But there needs to be something defined in your rule here.
And I'm saying there is something defined.
I would kind of maybe agree with Sneako that if you're arranging marriages between parents and the parents are acting sensibly, and we're talking about marriage, then yeah, maybe you could make the argument that you don't need the age of consent as much if it's for marriage specifically between two Islamic Quran adhering parents, and they're, somehow the court can prove that they're of sane, rational mind and all parties consent. They can get that on the document. They can actually prove and verify and follow through with all that. Then yeah, I guess you could argue for a deconstruction of the paradigm of ages of consent. The problem is, how do you protect the child? How do you protect so you'd basically have to say sex outside of wedlock is criminal, is what you'd have to say across the board. Or you'd have to have something separate outside of marriage, which so yeah, I don't know how. But my main question would be, how does Sneako protect the 9-year-old from the 30-year-old?
I'm saying there is.
A 14-year-old, in your definition, could literally marry an adult. That's a problem. In your world, a 14-year-old can marry an adult.
Yeah, in my world, two 14-year-olds could be adults. I'm telling you, why don't you see why that's weird? Two 14-year-olds, you don't think that two 14-year-olds could be married?
No, absolutely not. No, under no circumstances do I think two 14-year-olds can marry.
Can two 16-year-olds?
Let alone a 14 and a 20-year-old or whatever.
Okay, can two 16-year-olds be married?
No, I don't think two 16-year-olds.
Why is it wrong if a 16-year-old, because the age of consent is across the world, so many places 16. If they can go have frivolous sex with a lot of people, if they can go fuck around, if they can do deviant things, if they can change their gender, why can they not get married? Sex change, like Chris from Mr. Beast. These people could take hormone blockers. Listen, you're not listening. This is the point.
Yeah. This is another reason why I think we're going to see pedophilia kind of become mainstream and become part of the culture wars within the next 5 to 10 years, is because they already are pushing hormone blockers on children. They're already invading kids' sexuality. They're going to invade. Think about it like you have a nation which is being protected by borders. Basically, you have the LGBTQ community, which is encircling the fields and all of the dead space around the armaments of the castle and its walls and fortifications. It's encircling it. It's taking the children in the schools. You got queer drag story time. You got you got hormone blockers and gender transition for little kids. You got we're here, or we're queer and we're coming for your children. You got that shit. They're encircling their prey, and the next thing you're gonna see is the slow. I think it's gonna start with a cultural shift. I think that's what it's gonna start with. It's gonna start with a movement towards pedophilia, probably in the culture first, and then you're gonna see it in the legal system slowly. It might start with like weird precedents. That's how they might start it. You might see these weird legal cases where like they should have been pressed with pedophilia, but they get like a really light sentence, or they get they get let free because they're trans or something. That's my guess.
You could take hormone blockers. You could take puberty blockers, okay, when you're a child. When you're 16, you can go change your gender, but you can't get married? Why is that?
That's I don't know. I feel like that's a pretty obvious question.
No, it's not.
There are
It's not. See, if you cut your penis off, like Chris and Mr. Beast, if you cut your penis off, that is a life-altering
Did he
decision.
actually?
You can't glue it back on. You can get divorced if you get married.
Did he actually fucking cut it off? Did he actually, bro? It's hilarious.
This is a commitment that you're taking. A child, based off the liberal point of view that you believe in, they can have gender surgery. They can change forever.
Does he actually believe that? Does he actually believe that? I didn't know Charlie actually believed that. Charlie believes in gender surgeries for children, in the gender affirming care thing for children. He actually believes in that. That's a really, that's a bad one, Moist. That you're gonna fucking believe in that and then come argue about age of consent. That's not good.
He lagged out.
He pulled out his trump card, leg. But all right, I think these goobers are done. I'm probably gonna head in for the night. Cause yeah, let me kind of. So basically, what you have is Charlie, MoistCritikal Penguinzo, who is appealing from the kind of normative, cultural. He kind of almost touches on some good arguments, which is that you need this age of consent line in the sand. But he never really goes to the whole argument, which is to protect children. That's what it's there for. That's what you need it for. But he mostly sticks to normative claims. And then you have Sneako, which is he's really attacking the paradigm of the legal pivot around the age of 18 as the arbiter of morality and the arbiter of age of consent and marriage. And he pulls from kind of Islamic culture to govern sexuality and marriages and relationships and kind of touch on the same subject. The only problem, Sneako, is how do you protect the 9-year-old from getting raped? How do you prosecute them? What law do you use? I mean, I guess you could say, oh, well, I'll just outlaw premarital sex, and then anyone who does that is a rapist. You could do that, although then you're really relying on the court to just know to. But I feel like the precedent for a law that just outlaws all premarital sex is going to have really light punishments, right? Like, it's like if two 20-year-olds have sex outside of wedlock, are they really going to get 25 years in jail? Probably not. So if that's the legal precedent, then when a pedophile, how are they going to know to prosecute them and put them in jail for longer, other than just kind of a moral disgust? It'd be up to the judge. So no, I do think you need to specifically have a different separate crime for child pedophilia, statutory rape. And yeah, how do you protect the 9-year-old, Sneako? So here, I'll make my argument one more time, and then I'll close for tonight. My argument is that there is a moral obligation to protect children, and there's a teleological argument for the nature of sex. The teleological argument for the nature of sex is that sex being procreative, but also requiring specific boundaries and rules to be abided by for it to function successfully and to fulfill its purpose. That's why you can't have incest, can't have homosexuality, and it's also why children can't consent, is because it abuses the teleos of sex, and it becomes dysfunctional when you try to operate it with children, and tends to lead to negative externalities for the children, which is kind of a consequentialist argument. I get it. But the more pressing one is we have a moral obligation. The big one, the main one I'd use is we have a moral obligation to protect our children. And children do not have the physical or the mental faculties needed to participate in sexual acts. So they need to be past puberty. That's one. And then they need to be mentally developed. So that's two. And I think Sneako would agree with this. They need to be developed. He's like a developed age, which I kind of agree. Generally, that is the idea you're striving towards. The problem is you need a line in the sand to prevent bad actors from taking advantage of small children. So you need a way to actually prosecute and deter the 30-year-old from raping the 9-year-old. That's kind of the problem. And if all you do is you rely on Islamic culture and traditions, they don't really have a very thorough legal system to actually prosecute these people. So I would actually probably assume a lot of child molestation kind of goes unprosecuted in these third world countries, which would make sense, right? A lot of crimes go unprosecuted. They treat women horribly. They probably treat children horribly. And Muhammad married a 9-year-old, so that's kind of why you have all these Muslims going after the age of consent. It's because they're all thirsty for some 9-year-olds, bro. But I think with that, we're going to probably head out. It was kind of an underwhelming argument, this whole age of consent argument. You basically have Normie and Muslim Sneako trying to diddle 15-year-olds. Very exciting. Everybody get some good sleep. Everybody go take a nice rest and make sure to stay off your phone before you go to bed. Don't let that blue light mess up your REM sleep, right? And with that, I'm gonna head out. Take care, everyone.